Have you ever felt like you were stuck in a never-ending tunnel with no light in sight? You're not alone. Many people find themselves grappling with depression, feeling as if they're in a battle they can't win. But what if I told you that there's a way out? In this compelling story of transformation, we'll explore the incredible journey of one individual who faced their demons head-on and discovered practical strategies for overcoming depression that anyone can apply. This isn't just another feel-good tale. It's a real-life blueprint filled with actionable depression tips, mental health strategies, and natural remedies that can help you reclaim your joy and purpose. So, grab a seat, get comfortable, and prepare to be inspired as we delve into a narrative that not only touches the heart but also equips you with the tools to fight depression and find the light at the end of the tunnel. Jacob had always been the kind of person people described as steady. He lived in a small town, working as a teacher at the local high school, and was known for his endless patience with his students. Each day felt almost clockwork for him. He'd wake up early, take a brisk walk to wake up his mind, as he liked to say, and stop by his favorite cafe for a quick coffee on his way to work. Evenings were spent reading or catching up with old friends over the phone, a quiet, consistent life that he enjoyed, finding comfort in the predictability. Although Jacob was known for his calm demeanor, he had a certain spark for learning, a curiosity about the world and the people in it. He had a small collection of travel books on his shelf, always telling himself that, one day, he'd visit those far-off places. Yet he often hesitated, content with his familiar routines and reluctant to leave the safe boundaries of his small-town life. To others, he might have seemed like he had everything figured out, a peaceful rhythm, a stable job, and a close-knit circle of friends. But deep down, he was always searching for something, even if he couldn't put a name to it. In his free time, Jacob volunteered at a community center, helping teenagers with their homework and, sometimes, their life struggles. He genuinely cared about people and always seemed to know the right words to comfort them. His life, to anyone watching, looked like it was woven together with purpose and calm. People in town would say, "If only we could all be as steady as Jacob." Little did they know that underneath his steady, gentle nature was a mind that sometimes felt restless, though he'd long learned to ignore that sensation. Jacob's evenings, though, sometimes carried a tinge of loneliness he couldn't quite shake off. As he'd sit on his porch watching the sunset, a quiet unease would settle over him, a feeling he'd been avoiding. He brushed it off as just one of those things, a fleeting thought that wasn't worth giving much attention. It was easier to let the familiar routines keep those whispers at bay, convincing himself that this life was all he needed. And so, he carried on, day after day, each one blending seamlessly into the next. Little did Jacob know, his comfortable life was about to be shaken by something he never saw coming, an invisible weight that would test his resilience in ways he couldn't yet imagine. One winter evening, Jacob found himself struggling with a strange heaviness he couldn't explain. It started with simple things: trouble falling asleep, waking up with a foggy mind, and a sudden disinterest in the daily routines he once found comforting. Gradually, this weight grew, like a shadow that seemed to follow him everywhere. He tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to the gloomy winter weather or maybe just a passing mood. But day after day, the feeling stayed, gnawing at him, sinking deeper into his everyday life. Jacob didn't know it, but his depression was beginning to take root, sparked by years of pushing aside his own needs and desires. On the surface, it seemed he had everything in order, but inside, the years of bottled-up feelings and ignored dreams were catching up with him. His usual spark faded. The passion he had for his teaching and volunteering started slipping, leaving behind a hollow version of the person he used to be. The town noticed his absence at gatherings, and some friends started calling, asking if he was all right. But even picking up the phone became a task that felt nearly impossible. Daily tasks began to feel insurmountable. The familiar comfort of his morning walk was replaced by the feeling of walking through molasses. Even his students noticed. "Mr. Jacob, are you okay?" a concerned student asked one day. But Jacob couldn't bring himself to explain what was wrong because he didn't have the words for it. How could he describe this constant, nameless ache? This wasn't just sadness, It was a numbness, a sense that the world had somehow shifted into a dull gray. People around him offered well-meaning advice. Maybe you just need a break, try to get more sleep, or focus on the positive. But none of these simple fixes touched the deeper pain Jacob was carrying. He was drowning in silence, a silence that grew louder each day, even as he tried to keep up appearances. Deep down, he felt isolated in a way he had never experienced before, yet he didn't know how to reach out for the kind of help he truly needed. As the months dragged on, Jacob knew he couldn't keep living like this. The quiet despair was consuming him, bit by bit, and the life he once enjoyed felt unreachable. It was in these dark moments that he realized he couldn't fight this alone. But where could he turn for something beyond positive thinking and empty reassurances? In his heart, he knew he needed a deeper, lasting answer, a path to reclaim his life before it slipped away entirely. Just when Jacob felt he was at the end of his rope, a retired professor named Elena, whom he had met through his volunteer work, reached out. She had seen changes in him, subtle but unmistakable signs that only someone who had been through it herself might recognize. One evening, she invited him for tea, and as they sat together, Elena shared her own story of battling depression years ago. "Jacob, this isn't something you have to face alone," she told him gently, her eyes filled with understanding. "There's a way forward, one that doesn't rely on masking the pain but rather confronting it, slowly and with intention." Elena introduced Jacob to mindfulness practices, particularly mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, a blend of ancient meditation techniques and modern psychological strategies. She explained how learning to observe his own thoughts and emotions without judgment could help him step back from the constant, self-critical loop that depression had trapped him in. At first, Jacob was skeptical. "Really? Just sitting quietly and breathing?" he asked, half-jokingly. But Elena encouraged him to try, reminding him that sometimes it's the simplest practices that reveal the deepest truths. Over the weeks, Jacob began incorporating these practices into his daily routine, spending just a few minutes each morning in stillness, observing his thoughts without letting them pull him under. The progress was slow, but he started noticing subtle shifts. He felt a bit lighter after his practice, like he'd opened a tiny window, letting in some fresh air. Elena became his mentor, guiding him with patience, reminding him to embrace the process and trust the gradual, natural changes that came with consistency. She taught him that healing didn't mean forcing happiness but rather allowing himself to feel and accept the full range of his emotions. Elena also suggested other small lifestyle shifts that supported his mental health journey. Journaling before bed, reaching out to friends even when he didn't feel like it, and finding ways to connect with the world around him. She showed him how a balanced diet, with foods that supported brain health, could give him a steady source of energy and clarity. Gradually, Jacob learned that depression wasn't something he had to fight alone. It was a journey, one that could be softened by the right support and self-kindness. With each passing day, Jacob's connection to himself deepened. He no longer felt like he was battling a faceless monster in the dark. Instead, he was gaining tools and support to slowly reclaim his life. But he still had a long way to go, and a part of him wondered if he had the strength to push forward, to step outside the world he'd known and take on the greater challenges that lay ahead. One morning, as Jacob sat by the lake near his home, a letter arrived that would set his life on a whole new course. It was an invitation to join a month-long retreat in a quiet village known for its holistic healing practices, a place where people came to rediscover themselves. At first, he dismissed the idea. The thought of leaving everything behind seemed absurd. How could I just up and leave, he thought. The responsibilities, his work, the routine he clung to. But the invitation lingered in his mind, like an itch he couldn't ignore. Elena encouraged him, sensing that this journey might be exactly what he needed. She explained how immersing himself in a completely new environment could provide the fresh perspective his mind craved. Sometimes, she said, healing means stepping away from the familiar. Yet, doubt tugged at him. Jacob feared he might fail, that this leap would be too great. "What if I go and come back no better off?" he asked. But deep down, he also knew that he couldn't stay in the same cycle forever. Taking this path, however uncertain, was better than the slow, suffocating weight he carried each day. Finally, after much inner debate, Jacob took a leap of faith. He left his job temporarily, packed a few essentials, and set out for the village. As he left his familiar world behind, a mix of fear and excitement coursed through him. It was as if he was both running from and running to something he couldn't fully grasp. In a sense, the journey itself became his teacher, challenging him to embrace the unknown, to let go of control and trust the process. Arriving at the retreat, Jacob was struck by the quiet beauty of the place. Surrounded by mountains and ancient forests, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The people he met were on their own journeys, each person searching for a path to heal and grow. And although the idea of opening up to strangers felt daunting, Jacob felt a strange comfort here. He realized he wasn't as alone as he had once thought. Others shared the same struggles, the same desire to find light in the dark. As he settled into this new world, Jacob knew this would be no ordinary experience. It would demand resilience, honesty, and the willingness to confront every hidden corner of his mind. But he was ready, or at least as ready as he could be. The days ahead would test him, break him open, and maybe, just maybe, help him find the strength he'd been searching for. As Jacob adjusted to life at the retreat, he quickly realized it wasn't just a peaceful getaway. It was a rigorous journey, with each day testing him in unexpected ways. The structured silence of the mornings pushed him to confront his inner thoughts, exposing fears and insecurities he'd buried for years. Every activity, from long meditative walks to group discussions, demanded a level of self-honesty that he'd always avoided. At first, he struggled, feeling raw and vulnerable, as though his emotions were laid bare for everyone to see. He wondered if he was truly ready for this. The daily exercises introduced him to new practices, like journaling and breathwork, which required patience he didn't know he possessed. There were moments he wanted to quit, overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't easily explain. A sense of discomfort lingered, but he soon found support among his fellow attendees, each fighting their own silent battles. One evening, an older man named Leo shared his journey of beating depression naturally, using similar techniques. His story resonated deeply with Jacob, who began to see that these tools weren't just for coping, they were the path to transformation. Some days brought unexpected victories, like a breakthrough during a guided meditation where Jacob, for the first time, felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. It was fleeting, but it reminded him of what he was capable of experiencing. On other days, he faced setbacks. An argument with another attendee over a small misunderstanding left him reeling, triggering memories of past conflicts he thought he'd left behind. It was exhausting, a roller coaster of self-discovery, yet Jacob pushed forward, knowing each challenge brought him closer to understanding himself. As the retreat days passed, Jacob began building bonds that felt genuine and supportive, something he'd been missing for a long time. These connections reminded him of the importance of mental health support, knowing there were people who understood, people who cared. Each lesson from the retreat helped him to chip away at the walls depression had built around his heart. His confidence grew, slowly but steadily, like a sapling reaching for sunlight. Still, he sensed that his greatest test lay ahead. The journey had been grueling, and he had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. But the thought of returning to his old life with a new sense of purpose kept him grounded. His commitment to healing was stronger than ever, even as he braced himself for the ultimate challenge that would demand every ounce of strength he'd gathered. Jacob could feel it. The retreat was coming to an end, but his journey was far from over. His mind had opened, he'd learned so much, yet he knew he was about to face the hardest part, taking this newfound strength back into his regular life. With just a few days left, he poured himself into every exercise, treating each as preparation for the challenges he'd face when he returned home. There was no escaping it. He would confront the remnants of his old life, old habits, and the ever-lurking shadow of depression. One of the final practices involved crafting a personal mantra, a statement of resilience to carry him through dark times. "I am stronger than my struggle," he wrote, letting the words sink deep. The phrase felt powerful, simple yet weighty, a reminder of all he'd learned here. Elena guided him in visualizing his life back home, how he would respond to daily stress, moments of loneliness, and the familiar routines that had once triggered his descent. She encouraged him to lean on the mental health strategies he'd gained, to see them as allies rather than fleeting remedies. The mentor group also practiced role-playing situations, giving Jacob a sense of control over situations that previously would have seemed insurmountable. He acted out scenarios where he was faced with familiar stressors, work conflicts, social gatherings, even moments of isolation. Each practice left him feeling more equipped, more resilient. He knew he wouldn't escape these challenges entirely, but he now had tools to face them head-on, embracing his journey rather than fearing it. Before leaving, the retreat leaders gathered everyone for a final group reflection. Jacob listened as each person shared what they'd learned, their hopes, and the fears they still carried. He could relate to each story, each battle. In their words, he recognized the universality of the struggle and the strength it took to keep going. It was a bittersweet moment. He was both proud of his progress and keenly aware of the work that lay ahead. As he prepared to step back into the world, Jacob felt the weight of this next chapter settle in. He was ready, or as ready as he could be. The journey wouldn't be easy, but with his mantra, his mental health tips, and the powerful lessons from the retreat, he was armed for the battle ahead. And with a last deep breath, he walked forward, bracing himself for what was to come. As Jacob stepped back into his life, he initially found strength in his retreat experiences. But it didn't take long before the weight of familiar routines and pressures started to take their toll. There was one night, about a month after his return, when he found himself alone, back in that dark place he'd fought so hard to escape. It was as if all his progress had vanished. His mind grew heavy with self-doubt, and those old feelings of hopelessness crept in, telling him that his efforts were futile, that he'd always be fighting this invisible battle. In that moment, he remembered his mantra, "I am stronger than my struggle." But instead of giving him comfort, it felt hollow, almost mocking. This crisis hit hard. All the natural depression remedies, the mental health strategies, the tips for beating depression, none of it seemed to make a difference in that moment of despair. Jacob felt like he was back at square one, teetering on the edge of giving up, as if everything he'd achieved was slipping away. Yet, deep down, he knew this was a test of everything he'd learned. Struggling through the darkness, he remembered the words of his mentor, Elena. The real strength is in showing up for yourself when it's hardest. Summoning every ounce of willpower, he reached out to a friend he'd met at the retreat, even though he felt weak for needing help. The conversation reminded him he wasn't alone, that there was a community of people who understood and who, at some point, had probably faced their own crises. The hours passed slowly, but with each small step, he felt a bit stronger. He went back to basics, engaging in small acts of kindness toward himself, simple routines like breathing exercises, making a healthy meal, and journaling about the storm inside. These small actions began to pull him back to the surface. In embracing this moment, he found a new resilience, a layer of strength he hadn't known was there. As dawn broke, Jacob felt changed. He realized that even in his darkest hour, he'd chosen to fight, to keep moving forward. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, but it was a testament to his growth, a reminder that while the journey might always have its shadows, he'd learned how to navigate them. And that, he realized, was a victory in itself. After facing the darkness head-on, Jacob began to feel a shift within himself, a clarity that hadn't been there before. He realized that his struggle wasn't just about fighting depression. It was about embracing his own resilience and learning to live with compassion for himself. This newfound understanding was a gift he hadn't expected, a kind of treasure that made the hardships worth enduring. The reward wasn't tangible, but it was powerful, as he felt a calm strength growing from deep within. Jacob's self-compassion became the cornerstone of his mental health journey. He learned to appreciate the little victories, like getting up and making himself a healthy breakfast, going for a walk, or even choosing to spend time in nature. He began to see these moments as crucial parts of his healing, natural depression remedies that supported him without requiring any medication. And each step, no matter how small, added to his confidence and sense of control over his life. This wasn't just about beating depression fast. It was about creating a sustainable, fulfilling lifestyle. In one particularly reflective moment, he picked up a journal he'd started at the retreat. Flipping through the pages, he saw the fears and frustrations he'd once poured out and noticed how his own words now radiated strength. He could see his progress clearly, not as a linear path, but as a journey that had transformed him deeply. This journal became his own mental health guide, full of insights he could return to whenever he needed a reminder of his progress. Jacob began to share bits of his story with friends and family, revealing the depth of his struggles and the lessons he'd learned. This honesty brought a surprising sense of peace, as if each conversation released some of the weight he'd carried. His openness not only inspired those around him but also strengthened his resolve. He realized he was building a support network, a community that lifted him up and cheered him on, even during difficult days. This journey of overcoming depression had gifted Jacob more than he'd ever imagined. He didn't just feel like someone who'd won against depression. He felt like a different person entirely. Equipped with the tools, strength, and mental health tips he'd gathered, he was ready to move forward with purpose, knowing he had the power to handle whatever challenges lay ahead. With newfound wisdom, Jacob felt a calm confidence settle within him. Each day, he continued to integrate the mental health strategies he'd learned, weaving these practices into the fabric of his life. His past battles with depression, though difficult, had become his greatest teachers. Through journaling, meditation, and regular exercise, he'd crafted a personal toolkit for handling challenges. He understood that these were not just depression tips, but tools for thriving, guiding him beyond simply surviving. In his everyday interactions, he saw subtle but profound changes. When friends and family faced their own struggles, he now had a unique perspective and an empathetic ear. His journey had given him the ability to offer genuine mental health support, to remind others they weren't alone. Sharing the coping techniques that had helped him became a natural extension of his healing, a way to reinforce his progress while supporting others in their own journeys. Jacob also found a renewed sense of purpose in his work and relationships. The once daunting challenges of life no longer felt insurmountable. He now saw them as opportunities to apply his hard-earned resilience. When work grew stressful, he practiced mindfulness and took breaks, reminding himself that his well-being came first. When personal conflicts arose, he approached them with the kindness he'd learned to give himself, understanding that compassion was a two-way street. He even began speaking at small gatherings and mental health workshops, sharing his story and the insights he'd gained on natural depression remedies and the power of self-compassion. His story resonated with others, reminding them that healing was possible, even in the darkest moments. This journey of overcoming depression wasn't just his story, it was a beacon of hope for others. As Jacob reflected on how far he'd come, he felt gratitude for the struggle he'd endured. He understood now that the pain had shaped him, building a foundation of strength and empathy that would carry him forward. His life had come full circle, and he was prepared to face whatever came his way with an open heart and unshakable resolve. When Jacob returned to his everyday life, it felt strangely familiar yet undeniably different. The bustling city streets, the chatter of friends, and the comforts of home wrapped around him like an old worn blanket. But he was no longer the same man who had walked away in search of answers. His experiences had reshaped him, turning his past struggles into stepping stones toward a brighter future. He carried with him not just memories but a toolkit of mental health strategies that would guide him through the inevitable ups and downs. At work, Jacob found himself engaging with colleagues in a new way. He actively sought out conversations that went beyond the surface, asking how others were doing and sharing snippets of his own journey. This openness sparked deeper connections and created a supportive atmosphere. It was as if he'd opened a door, inviting others to step in and share their own stories. They, too, began to open up about their battles, be it work-related stress or personal challenges, creating a ripple effect of empathy and understanding. Jacob's family also noticed the change in him. During family gatherings, he initiated discussions about mental health, encouraging his loved ones to talk about their feelings without fear or judgment. He introduced them to practical coping strategies, from mindfulness exercises to journaling techniques. His mother, who had always dismissed such discussions as unnecessary, began to see the value in opening up. "You know, Jacob," she said one evening, "maybe it's time I start keeping a journal too." That moment was a small victory for Jacob, a sign that he was making a difference. He also prioritized self-care in his routine, dedicating time each week to activities that nourished his soul. Whether it was hiking in nature, practicing yoga, or simply enjoying a good book, he understood the importance of maintaining his mental health. He'd learned that fighting depression was not a one-time battle. It was a lifelong commitment to himself. Jacob embraced this idea, ready to support others while continuing to nurture his own well-being. As he moved through life with a renewed sense of purpose, Jacob found joy in the small moments, watching the sunset, sharing laughter with friends, and savoring a quiet cup of coffee. His journey had equipped him to handle challenges with grace, allowing him to embrace both the highs and lows. The world felt vibrant, full of possibilities, and he was grateful for the path he'd traveled. It was a journey that, while challenging, had led him to a profound understanding of himself and the strength that comes from vulnerability. Jacob's transformation was evident in every aspect of his life. The man who once felt overwhelmed by darkness had emerged into the light, carrying a radiant confidence that inspired others. His experiences had sculpted him into a version of himself that was not only resilient but also empathetic and understanding. No longer was he defined by his struggles with depression. Instead, he was a beacon of hope, proving that overcoming depression was not just a possibility but a reality. This newfound identity came with a sense of responsibility. Jacob realized that his journey wasn't just for himself. It was an opportunity to uplift others navigating their own battles with mental health. He became actively involved in community outreach programs, speaking to schools and local organizations about the importance of mental health support and the effectiveness of natural depression remedies. Sharing his story created a ripple effect, encouraging many to take their first steps toward healing. Every day presented an opportunity for Jacob to practice the mental health tips he'd learned. He made a conscious effort to remain grounded, practicing mindfulness in the chaos of everyday life. He knew how to fight depression now, not just for himself but for those who still struggled in silence. Each time he connected with someone who felt lost, he felt a spark of purpose ignite within him. It was a cycle of giving and receiving, where his own healing became intertwined with helping others. Jacob also embraced new hobbies that fed his spirit. He took up painting, discovering that expressing his emotions through art brought him a sense of freedom. His paintings often depicted scenes of hope and resilience, resonating with the themes of his journey. Friends and family marveled at how he had not only transformed his life but had also found a creative outlet that brought joy to his soul. The culmination of Jacob's journey was a celebration of life itself. He organized an event in his community, inviting people to share their stories of struggle and triumph. It was a vibrant gathering filled with laughter, tears, and connection. Jacob stood before the crowd, his heart swelling with pride as he realized the impact he had made, not just on himself but on an entire community. He had turned his pain into purpose, showing everyone that they, too, could overcome their struggles and emerge stronger than ever. As Jacob settled into his renewed normalcy, he felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The chaos of his past no longer haunted him. Instead, it served as a backdrop for the vibrant tapestry of his life. He now understood that life wasn't about avoiding struggles but embracing them as part of the journey. The resilience he had cultivated became a compass, guiding him through life's inevitable challenges with grace and humor. In his day-to-day routine, Jacob made a conscious effort to integrate the lessons he had learned. Morning meditations and gratitude journaling became rituals that grounded him, allowing him to face each day with intention. He encouraged others to adopt similar practices, sharing tips for beating depression naturally and promoting mental health support within his circle. His friends, once skeptical, found themselves drawn into discussions about well-being, creating a supportive network that thrived on openness. Jacob's relationships flourished as well. He nurtured deeper connections with his family, initiating heart-to-heart conversations that had previously felt daunting. His willingness to be vulnerable encouraged his loved ones to open up, transforming family gatherings into rich exchanges of feelings and experiences. They no longer shied away from tough topics. Instead, they confronted them with compassion and understanding. It was as if a veil had been lifted, allowing them to truly see one another. Every opportunity for connection, whether it was volunteering at a local shelter or hosting community workshops on mental health, became a chance for Jacob to reinforce his commitment to helping others. He realized that while he had faced his demons, many still fought their battles in silence. By sharing his story and providing depression help, he ignited sparks of hope in those around him. Jacob understood that his purpose was to guide others, just as he had been guided, creating a ripple effect of healing. Through it all, Jacob carried a sense of gratitude. He recognized that the journey he had undertaken was a necessary part of his evolution. While he would always remember the struggles, they no longer defined him. Instead, they became stepping stones on the path to a richer, more fulfilling life. With every challenge he faced, he was reminded of his strength and resilience, and the knowledge that he could always rise again, ready to embrace whatever came next. As we wrap up this inspiring journey, it's essential to reflect on what you've learned. Every setback can lead to a comeback, and with the right tools and mindset, overcoming depression is within your reach. Are you ready to take the first step? Consider incorporating some of these mental health tips into your daily routine. Whether it's practicing mindfulness, seeking mental health support, or simply reaching out to a friend. Remember, you're not alone in this fight. There's a community out there waiting to support you. So, what's holding you back? Dive into this journey, apply what resonates with you, and watch as your life begins to transform. And if you found this story helpful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more insights and strategies on mental health and personal growth. Together, we can turn the page on depression and start writing a new, brighter chapter in our lives.